Welcome to the Infuse Compassion podcast, hosted by me, Amy Quisenberry.
And me, Mark Carpenter.
We are on a mission to make this world a kinder place for us all by bringing healthier human connection to communities, families, and organizations of all types and sizes.
Our goal is to create stronger relationships, more inspired teams, increased trust, and improved results.
So let's get started with more ways to infuse compassion into our world. Welcome back to the Infuse Compassion podcast. It is so wonderful to have you here. We met with just a beautiful angel of a soul, Susan LaPlae Miller. I actually was introduced to Susan by another dear friend, Linda Grizzly, who also joined us on the Infuse Compassion podcast. And when I met Susan, I instantly felt a kindred spirit. And as our conversation continued to grow, more areas of connection and this kindred spirit feeling. And I just knew, Susan, you have to come and join our podcast, share your wisdom. As I said at one point in the episode with Susan, her commitment to her soul's, it's a little bit different the way I said it, but here's my version now. Her commitment to her soul's evolution in this life is so powerful, and her integrity in how she holds herself accountable is so beautiful. And there's such a gentleness to her. And in this time, in this era, and when I say gentle, I'm going to balance that with incredible strength as well. But there's just this gentleness to Susan that is just so beautiful and so tender and so genuine. So if you haven't listened to the Know Yourself, Trust Yourself episode with Susan, please go back and listen to that. And because she's an angel that has such wisdom to share. And so with that, Mark, I really want to open it up to you, and I want to hear, what are some thoughts that you have as a result of spending time with Susan?
There were a couple of key points that kept coming up, and I'm going to call them out as I heard them, and then I want to get your reactions on them. So I'm going to turn this around and throw it back on you. She talked a lot about building that trust with families, within teams. And some of the key points that came up regularly were, it requires us to listen very carefully. Well, listening came up a lot. Listening to understand where people are and who people are and what their differences are, but also listening to say, let's solve this problem together. When we're facing challenges, don't just jump in and try to fix it, but let's solve it together, which also requires listening. She also brought up a couple of times modeling behavior. If you want a team that behaves in a certain way and that shows trust, that demonstrates trust to each other, you need to model the behavior that is going to lead to trust among the team. The third point, and I'll let you pick any of these that you want to dive onto from here, but the third point I heard a lot was humility. Was being open, understanding yourself and trusting who you are yourself enough that you can be humble enough to say, I'm open to everybody else being themselves too. And I'm open to those opinions. The humility, I think, ties to the listening, because I'm going to listen better if I'm humble enough to know that I don't have all the answers myself. Any of those jump out to you that you want to drill down on, Amy?
Well, I think they're all absolutely critical. And I think that, trust, I think, just from a foundational perspective, and one of the reasons why I love what we chose to name the episode, Know Yourself, Trust Yourself. Life, as you go through your life, getting to know yourself is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself. And I say this from a place of, I think I hid from myself for the majority of my first 4 decades of life, not wanting to explore deep inside, scared to listen, not knowing how to listen, looking outside for validation. And I love what how Susan just anchors into this foundational point of, above all, trust yourself. But to trust yourself, you need to know yourself, to take the time to go inside. So I like all of them. I believe in all of them. But what really got me was the trust yourself.
Yeah.
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 But you, did anything, I want to ask you the same question. Like, out of those three, is there any one that really kind of jumped out at you more than another?
Well, I anchor to those three because those are 3 points that I talk about a lot.
Hmm.
And so the all of them stood out to me as well. I was just going to say, our, Susan's experience where she talked about working on a team where there was high trust and good collaboration, people got along, they worked together to solve problems, and then later experiencing a team where that wasn't in place.
Hmm.
I love the fact that she did the analysis between those because I've experienced that myself. When I started my career, I was on some really good, high functioning, high trust teams. And then I got into an organization where that didn't exist. And I was like, I don't get it. Why isn't this happening? Because I thought the experience that I started my career with was the norm
Yeah.
and not the exception. And so I love that she's taken the time, and this is why I think people need to really listen to Susan, is because she's taken the time to make that analysis. That if you're in a situation where you're struggling with trust, with having a high functioning team where you trust each other and work well together, Susan's tracked that. She's looked at the code to see what's the difference between the high functioning teams and the teams that are struggling. And so having those specific behaviors that build trust, I think is really key. And that's one of the things I want people to really listen for as they listen to Susan's episode, but also look at their own lives and think about, when I'm in a situation where there is high trust, not only just what does it feel like, but what are the behaviors that I'm seeing from people? Because if we want to build a culture, if we want to build an organization where it has values like trust and respect, we have to understand what are the behaviors that make that happen. I often say your values cannot be words on the wall, they have to be
Mhm.
behaviors in the hall. And so, what are the behaviors that actually lead to high trust teams? And that's what you're going to want to look for.
Well, and I think too much of the time there are organizations that think that the words on the wall is enough.
Yep.
That, and the difficult conversations with employees, leaders, whoever, that is not aligning to the values, when it's ignored, when it's dismissed, when people who are behaving badly are then promoted. It is, I mean, again, I've used this analogy before, I'll use it again. You put poison in a glass, I don't care how much water or lemon or sugar you put in there, that poison is still going to kill you. It's still in there. And it's disheartening to see when that happens. And part of me says that, and then at the same time I'm like, and then we're left with a difficult conversation because this person's doing something right. There's a reason why they're there, and a lot of times it's because of the relationships that maybe they have with external people that they're able to bring in partnerships with. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have the meaningful conversations, because we don't have to get rid of everything. But what if we help them be kinder, be they don't have to continue to behave in ways that aren't aligning with our company's values. And I just, my hope is that if there are organizations that are listening to this right now and thinking, yeah, there's a conversation that I need to have with somebody and I don't know how to have it, pick up the phone, call Mark or call me. We can help you. Call Susan. Call any one of a number of our guests that we've had on, because there's a lot of people that can help you through that. You don't have to be alone and you don't have to feel like you're powerless and you're not supported. We can help you.
And part of that conversation, a lot of times we think, yeah, how do I say what I need to say? But just as important to that is, how do I listen to what they're saying?
Mm.
And that was one of the points that Susan emphasized a lot, is sit in the stillness and listen for a little bit to see what's really going on with them. A lot of times we say we have a value of collaboration, but then when a challenge arises, the leader says, let me just tell you what to do. I'm going to jump in and fix this. Often that comes from a good place. It comes from a place of saying, I care enough that I want to help my team, so I'm going to jump in and fix this for them. But Susan made a really important point that jumping in and fixing for people isn't necessarily compassionate.
Mm-hmm.
But to help people to understand how to fix it themselves is much more compassionate. That requires the listening heart and the listening mind to have the humility and the desire to say, I respect your view. I respect your experience and your knowledge, that we're going to fix this together. I'm not going to leave you alone to do it necessarily. I'm not going to dump it on you, because that's not a compassionate servant leader either. But I'm going to listen well enough that we're going to work together to solve this problem. And it's really interesting. We know how to listen generally,
Mm.
but listening well and listening deeply is a skill that has to be developed, and it has to be conscious. There are times when I slip out of listening mode, even though I preach this all the time, that we need to listen more intently, listen more intentionally to other people. And so it takes that conscious effort to listen well.
Well, and just to add to that, she specifically talked about listening without judgment. And then I want to emphasize that there's boundaries here, right? Not listening to fix. You talked about this, right? But just going back and double underlining this. Those boundaries are, hold on a second. What's my lane here? I loved the piece where she talked about, there's a question that you had asked her at one point about, what happens if you have team members that, I can't remember your specific question, but I don't know if you recall what it was,
Yes,
Mark.
because I was asking from a leadership perspective.
Mhm.
Let's say that you're not overstepping those boundaries, but you see people who report to you who are in leading their teams. How do you help them?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. And being able to stop and ask them, well, what are your professional development aspirations? It, is this really where you want to be spending your time? Or do you want to spend it developing those areas that you're focused on developing? We can be there and support in partnership, in alignment with, and not take over or do, right? We can absolutely do that. Um, what else jumped out at you, Mark?
One of the points that she made is that building teams with strong trust will help you during difficult times, but it starts in the good times. We sometimes think, okay, in this difficult moment, difficult economy, whatever it happens to be, we need to have a team of trust. Let's build a team of trust. But the team of trust, the behaviors that build that trust, happen during the good times. And we sometimes get casual during those times. Things are going well. I'm not going to be as intentional about how I listen or build the team. And then difficult times come, and the behaviors aren't practiced that help keep that trust alive
Mm,
within the team.
Mhm.
And then that makes the difficult time even more difficult for the team to get through. And so I just want to put that out there for leaders, particularly who are in a time where it's like things are pretty good. What are you doing now to build that trust and to strengthen that team so that there is cohesion when the times get difficult? Stephen Covey talks about this as building your emotional bank account or building a relational bank account. If I can build that trust during the good times, when the difficult times come and I need to say, hey, we need to stay late, we need to do a little extra work, or
Yeah.
I'm going to have to ask you to take on a new role here that may be a little uncomfortable for you. If the trust bank account is built up, then I can draw on that in that difficult time, and the relationships are still going to be strong. And it's still going to feel like a compassionate, trusting team.
And that investment and commitment in those healthy, easier times is so important from a foundational perspective. It really, really is. Another thing that she talked about regarding the boundaries that we just spoke about is I loved how she connected to this over responsibility, right? Of that can lead to burnout,
Yeah.
right? So if we're overly focused, whether it's our team that aligns to us, somebody that is a peer, a colleague of ours, a family member, a friend, and we're not supporting in a way that's healthy for us and healthy for that person. I know that there's somebody in my life that I don't know if it's the way this person was raised, but I see this person navigate through life, and the story that I make up in my head is that throughout their life, the default has been for them to solve things. And so much of the time with this person, I have to say, this isn't for you to solve. This isn't yours. And I'll see them take a deep breath and sigh. Like they need to be given permission to not be the person to fix this. They're through time of this isn't yours to fix. This isn't it. There I see them advocating for themselves in a more healthy way of being like, that's not mine. But for a long time, I saw this struggle, which I felt like they were always underwater, gasping for air, trying to find, like, because every problem on their desk was everybody else's and theirs came last. Imagine how that must feel for a person that feels the burden of, in addition to their stuff that they've got to own, so many people around them as well. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And that fix it mentality, it comes from a good place.
Mm,
I would say at least most of the time that I see that with people, and when I've fallen into that mode,
mhm,
it comes from a place where we want to be helpful. We're trying to be compassionate.
mhm,
This was one of the things that Susan talked about with that pieces of I. All of us are different eyes that are out there, not the eyes that we see with, but the eyes of the individual. And it takes all of those pieces to make it work together. If I'm trying to jump in and fix problems that are not mine to fix, I'm kind of stepping on somebody else's eye.
mm.
And that's not healthy and that's not respectful or compassionate. A phrase that I use with people sometimes when they jump into those situations where it's not their responsibility to fix it, not your circus, not your monkeys. It is this is not your problem to
Yeah.
solve. And again, most of the time when I'm saying that to people, their desire to fix it, their desire to get in the middle of it, which is burning them out, comes from a good place.
Yeah.
It comes from a desire to be helpful and to care for other people.
Well, and Mark, um, I think that when we think about the pieces of I and the piece where Susan spoke about who I am today as a result of having this time with the both of you, I'm different. And tomorrow I'm going to have another exchange with somebody and I'm going to be different. We are evolving every day throughout the day. And so when we spend our times in other people's stuff, we're literally robbing ourselves of the opportunity for our lessons, my lesson, my path, my journey. Like, just think about that for a minute. If we're continuously in other people's stuff, regardless of the intentions, what a disservice we're doing to ourselves and helping our soul evolve, our spirit shine in the best way that it can, right?
Another phrase that I have learned that I have to remind myself of a lot is every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else.
I love that phrase. It's one of my favorites.
Yeah. And it's especially important, I think, when what we're saying no to is ourselves.
Mm.
And I'm not suggesting, I don't want this to swing into, yes, I'm going to do everything that's in benefit to me, because that gets selfish and that's not compassionate either. But we don't want to sacrifice our own self compassion for jumping into something where we don't belong under the guise of, but I'm being more compassionate.
Yeah.
And so that was a nice balance that Susan talked about, particularly in building good, strong teams or families and relationships, is to have that balance of who's got which part,
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that that's clearly defined, and have those boundary conversations that you talked about, and make sure that we're dealing with our own circuses, our own monkeys,
That's right.
and not stepping on ourselves, stepping on our own eye, if you will, when we take on more than we actually should.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Amen to that. What else? What else jumped?
The only other point that I want to get to, I really encourage people to get all the way to the end of the episode with Susan. You know that we ask that question of all of our guests. What is one
Mhm.
tip that you can give to infuse compassion into our lives this week? And she talked about the power of that pause.
Mhm.
The power, our brains work so fast, and our brains create our emotional state so fast that sometimes we're not aware of it. We're not aware of that process, that we jump into a situation, we make assumptions, and we're feeling emotions and are being driven by those emotions without slowing down enough to say, what is the thought process that's getting me there?
Yeah.
And I think it's really important to slow down and have that awareness. We could have done a whole episode on that, her little tip there, what she calls the A4 mindset
Yeah.
of starting with awareness. And I'll let you go back and listen to it, listeners, to get the whole thing. But it starts just with the awareness of what are my thoughts that are leading to the way that I react, so that we can be intentional about our thoughts and how we're going to react to those.
Well, and if you weren't going to bring this up, I was going to. So I'm glad that you did, because when she was talking about that, I was like, that's the A in my compassion framework, right? It's having the awareness. I don't have acknowledgement in there, but that's part of it. But it's the awareness and the acceptance. That's what the A in my compassion framework stands for: awareness and acceptance. And when we can have that, right? Like she says, then you can go in action. Another area where I was like, kindred spirit. Yes, yes. So I just, I think there's one last thing that I do want to mention, and that's the emphasis that she shared on really getting to know your team. She talked about understand what their worries are. What keeps them up at night? What do they care about? What's important to them? Right? And like really understand it, really know. And the importance of, Johnny and Janie on your team. What Johnny worries about and what Johnny cares about is completely different than what Janie wants and what worries Janie. and to really understand that, because and whether it's your kids, whether it's your friends, whether it's your parents, your siblings, people you work with, it's all relevant, right? Of each individual, really seeing them and understanding, again, without judgment.
Yeah.
So a huge thank you again to Susan for her wisdom and her strength and grace. And uh, if there isn't anything else, Mark, I think we should just wish everybody a wonderful rest of week, and just keep infusing compassion into the world, everybody. Keep doing the great work and keep coming back. All right. Thanks,
Thanks for being with
everybody.
us.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Infuse Compassion podcast. If you enjoyed the conversation, please share a review and like the podcast so other compassionators can join us. Until next time, let's all do something each day to infuse compassion into the world. For more information on our guests, see the show notes. For more information on Mark and Amy, go to infusecompassion.com.